Hey everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, bringing you another book to decide. Do you read it over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pit of Mount Doom? So let's decide. Eragon. The first of the Inheritance cycle and debut author of Christopher Paolini, which is how I was told it was said. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's what I'm sticking with for now. Eragon is a young adult fantasy novel self-published by Paolini and his parents in 2001, before it was discovered by novelist Carl Hiaasen, I'm not sure how to say that, who got the book republished in 2003 by Alfred A. Knopf. Always wondered how you're supposed to say Knopf. I mean, you can't quite see the publishing company here, but it says Knopf. Anyways, in the year 2003, Eragon was the third best-selling children's hardback novel, as well as the second best-selling children's paperback novel. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 121 weeks, at least according to what I could find. And in the year 2006, the novel won the Nene Award, I think it's Nene, by the Children of Hawaii, the Rebecca Caldwell Young Readers Book Award, and the Young Readers' Choice Awards, basically, are all in the same year. It was adapted into a movie released in 2006, and had a video game adaptation of the same year, though it mostly followed the plot of the movie, which, for those of you who have read the book and seen the movie, they're not the same thing.
Past, and the ruthless Galbatorix now rules the land. And Duza, a wicked shit, enforces Galbatorix's iron rule.
And as you can tell from the ratings, it was a poor choice. But anyways, Eragon, to me, however, was something of a special place in my heart. One of my favorite series when I was growing up, and around middle school, high school, I guess. Eragon was the first book I read that I saw as a movie first, and found the book later, and discovered that, wow, books really are better than movies most of the time. I mean it when I say the movie they made on this book. If you haven't seen it, I don't recommend it. But I mean it when I say the movie that they made on this book feels like someone just opened it, read the plot synopsis, found some spark notes and read those, and then decided to make a movie on it. Because whoever made the movie did not read the book for a variety of reasons. I'm not going to go into them today. I don't really cover adaptions yet. I may in the future, but for now, it's books here. But anyways, because of that, I became enamored with the series. At least until Inheritance came out, which I was really mixed on when I first read it. I don't know if it'll hold up to a reread. I'm not going to get to it this month, but for me, this really kind of brought down a lot of the enjoyment I had of the series from the book perspective. But that's a review for another time. Today, I'm going to focus on Eragon. Starting off simply, we're going to discuss the cover. Now, as you can see, I have the hardback, the deluxe edition, limited edition hardback, and that comes with the dust sleeve. I actually have the hardback for all of the Inheritance cycle because I got this when it first came out, along with Eldest and Bersinger. This one I had a smaller hardback for, but I recently found this one in a thrift store, so yeah. But anyways, I'm getting off point here. We'll start simply. The cover. The cover of the book is nice and simple, following a theme throughout the series where it'll be a dragon. Typically one either introduced in that book or that is featured most prominently through it. I do enjoy the cover. It gives us a good depiction of how Saphira, the main dragon character, is supposed to be, as well as making it quite clear that this is going to be a book about dragons. If I did have a complaint about the cover, it's a little basic. It doesn't quite convey anything about the plot, or even really the characters, beyond telling us what Saphira looks like. I mean, you can kind of get something of an expression on the dragon, but the dragon's face is just different enough that we really wouldn't be able to tell too much. From this, I would say Saphira is more demure but wise as a dragon, which is definitely not what she is. Well, she's wise, but she's definitely not demure. Just based on, it kind of looks like she's giving a furtive glance. Anyways, I'm getting off track. And if I'm being honest, I sort of prefer Saphira's design in the movie adaptation. The art here feels like it's trying to blend the Eastern and Western style dragons together, but isn't quite doing it well. It's clearly far more Western than Eastern, but then it keeps the long whisker-like eyebrows, the more serpentine kind of appearance to it. It's just one of those, you should have blended it either more or just stuck with one side. So yeah, that's what I have to say about the cover, more or less. So let's go on to the story itself. It's good.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I'm not going to say it's great, and admittedly I do say it's good with a bit of reservation, mostly due because of my nostalgia for the book. The book is a lot more simple than I remember it as a kid, I mean, and that's fair. And I found the writing in general, like prose and dialogue, really weak compared to what I remember it being. Though it did shine pretty well when it came to characters, and the actual story itself does hold your attention, but I'm gonna talk about that a little bit later. As for someone who's read the entire series, I can also proudly say that the first book does actually hold several hints to the twists and revelations that come later on in the series. One of the things that always bothers me when I read epics like this, and I start with the first book and then go into the others, is that it feels like the author wasn't expecting his first book to get as big as it did. So for the future series, he's just throwing twists out there because he didn't know what to do beyond that. And I can definitely say, for the most part, when I read this, I can see that Paolini did have a lot of the things he reveals later on planned. Or at least it feels like he had it planned. In a sense that, even if he didn't, he at least took what he had already set up and used that to make his story more interesting. The world building is also a tiny bit basic as well. The first book is a bit light on it, as it mostly serves to introduce most of the species and characters of the world, rather than diving deep into their cultures. You get to know the Urgals, the dwarves, the elves, the humans, the riders. You basically know they exist in this book, but you don't delve too deep into them. And maybe it's just my knowledge of the previous books, which allows me to have a more favorable opinion of this. But I did enjoy the world building to an extent. I personally found that the dwarves were the most interesting faction in the stories. Not just in this book, but in future books as well, despite the increased focus that the elves get later on. If I had one complaint, the unique species, at least in this book, are pretty bland. I mean, you have some. You learn about some, and I can say that the Razak do get a lot more world building later on in Eldest and in Basinger. But, like, with the Shade, I just found that a little disappointing for all the build-up it has. Or the Urgals, which are nothing more than orc XPs, at least in this novel. And admittedly, a bit later in the other novels. To the point where you wonder why they're not just orcs. But for the most part, I think it's fine. It's very clearly Tolkien-inspired. But I think he does just enough to separate himself from Tolkien that it's not just like... But it's not just like reading Tolkien's works when you're being introduced to these races. That being said, we need to talk about this story. This is literally just Star Wars: A New Hope if you took the space out of space fantasy. And before I begin going deeper into this, I just want to be clear. I do not like the criticism that something is bad simply because it's similar to another work already established. And yeah, I get where it comes from. No one wants to keep reading the same stuff over and over again. But I personally think that people sometimes take it too far. That they boil stories down to such bare bones that it really could sound like anything if you looked hard enough. A good example is the Marvel movie formula. Well, a lot of people say the Marvel movies are generally just the same film over and over again. But in reality, if you boiled anything down to such the bare bones that the people who critique Marvel movies with this do, then it would sound like anything. And don't get me wrong, there are complaints that can be leveled at Marvel movies. It's just this particular complaint I find is one of the weakest for as commonly as it's used. Because if you boil any story down to the bare bones, it's going to seem like anything. For those of you who think I'm maybe just exaggerating or I'm focusing a little too much on this point, you're right. But, in a sense, take this in mind. Finding Nemo and Taken are the same story if you boil it down enough. Yeah, they're both effectively the same story of a father whose only child is kidnapped by an unknown force. Then they must travel across the world, encountering dangerous foes the entire time as they attempt to rescue them. There's other stories this works for. Aladdin and Les Mis are essentially the same story as well. Yeah, so with that clear, yeah, this is literally just A New Hope. I mean that, and it's distracting. This book is about a boy coming into his manhood, raised by an uncle who accidentally takes something from the Empire, which was stolen by a princess and sent towards him in a last-ditch effort to keep it out of the Empire's hands, accidentally leading the Imperial forces to his home and getting his extended family killed, before leaving home with a wizened old mentor of a profession he is now inheriting, who proceeds to give him a blade suited for the profession he's in, picking up a roguelike character along the way, going to rescue previous princess in the Empire, which ends up killing the old mentor in the attempt, the princess leading them back to the rebellion who fights the Empire, but accidentally leading the Empire back with them, which leads to a climactic final battle where the hero, using advice from the now dead mentor and the object from the beginning the princess saved, defeats them and deals a crippling blow to the Empire. It's A New Hope. I'm sorry, it really is. It's A New Hope to such a degree that it's distracting, and thus it's a big detriment, because we've already done this story before, and it's not just if you boil it down enough, it's the same story. No, this is literally the same story. One takes place in space fantasy, one takes place in high fantasy. But from my understanding, this is a debut novel, and from my understanding, Paolini was really young when he came up with this manuscript. I think 15. He didn't actually publish the work at 15, but that's when he wrote the manuscript. So it's hard to take this point too harshly. I wrote a lot of dumb shit when I was a 15-year-old, so Paolini got me beat by spades by just doing this. At least at that time. But yeah, that's the biggest complaint I honestly have about this book, is it really is that. And like I said, it will still keep your attention, and the characters are really good. It does something New Hope doesn't, which is actually making you care about the place that Eragon comes from before he has to leave. So, yeah. So overall, I think the book holds up actually kind of well enough on a reread. It definitely wasn't as good as I remember. And I don't think I would call it bad. Personally, it's about a 6 out of 10 in terms of rating. It's definitely not something I would like as much if I had discovered it today with my current standard of reading. But it also wasn't written for me as I am today. This is a young adult novel. It's actually classified as a children's novel in some places. But honestly, it's fine for what it is. I would recommend it to anyone who wants to see Star Wars, but in a high fantasy setting, Or just if you want a fantasy epic in general, but just be warned, it's no Lord of the Rings. It's not complicated. Simple, and you've definitely seen the story before if you've watched Star Wars. As for my next video, well, for those of you who've watched my TBR, you already know what it is. But in this case, I think I'm going to fill out the land. But until then, remember, with every book is an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even if it's a bad one.